Hey guys, what's going on? I'm Ben Bateman.
And I'm Andrew Ghai.
And we are
the Action Guys.
Whoa, that sounds cool when we say it out loud. Whoa.
We're just going to keep doing that.
Hot take.
Right?
Yeah,
like
we're just going to...
We decided like 3 weeks ago it sounded ridiculous and it feels kind of dumb.
I feel like Captain Planet.
But I love it.
I liked in the old episode we did, I was like, but that's what we are.
But that's what we are.
What's up, everybody? We're back. This is episode 2 since... the shit went down.
I was like, this is not episode 2.
And we're here to talk to you guys about the most interesting career in Hollywood, Mr. Samuel L. Jackson, who had a huge movie open this last weekend, Glass, the third installment in the, was it Israel 177?
That's it. Yeah, Israel 177 trilogy.
Yeah, so there's a lot to talk about there. We have some pretty interesting ideas about that. In case you guys are watching this and catching up for the first time, since all the Schmodown shenanigans go, we kind of keep those topics separate.
We do.
I hate Andrew, but right now... he's my brother on this show.
Ben is a dirty traitor, but I will talk with him for the next hour about how interesting Sam Jackson is. Even though if Sam Jackson was here, he would call you a motherfucker.
He would. And if you guys have no idea what we're talking about, check out the Schmodown. It's on the Schmoes Know, which has now been retitled into the Movie Trivia Schmodown YouTube channel. There's a ton of cool stuff there, and we were big featured in this Schmodown Spectacular thing that went up.
We got some
Christmas.
drama.
It's really good. And there's a live show that's going up this weekend in New York, which I wish either of us could go to, but...
Excuse me. Yeah, I know. It'd be so cool to be there. And then the awards show is actually going to be released on Friday, which is really cool. It'll go up on air then. So
I was going to say, if you guys are fans of Schmodown and you haven't checked it out already, the New York event is going to be live streaming. It's, I think... I hope I'm not misquoting this. I think it's $3 to live stream it, and if you're a patron at like the $10 level, you get to stream it for free. So go check that out right now. It's the first one of these we're ever doing in the Schmodown, and it's a really big deal. It's really exciting. The more support we get behind this, the more of those we're going to get to do. I know Christian wants to take this thing all over the world, so be sure to check that out.
And those live stream numbers are going to be a big part of it, just to see how engaged the audience is. And then if you know Ben and I from another show called Action Movie Anatomy, you'll see that we actually covered Unbreakable on that show this week with Spencer Treat Clark, Joseph Dunn himself.
Yeah.
Really amazing episode. We actually don't get to talk about the movie that much. Like, we talk about it some.
The best scenes.
A good amount.
And his scenes, which are
great. His scenes. But it's a really awesome deep dive into his career. He's a fascinating dude. Really cool guy. Very like, humility through the roof. Awesome stories. I love that episode of AMA.
Yeah, it was really fun. He was great, and I recommend you guys check it out. There's like 200 episodes of that show. So let's get through the shout-outs. We'll get to a few more of them later in the show. We had this conversation, and I think probably the best place to start with it is that on the cover of the poster for the film Glass,
of the movie that is titled Glass,
it's named after Sam Jackson's character, Mr. Glass. It has him on the cover of the film. When you watch the movie, which we're going to try not to spoil too much because it seems unnecessary.
Yeah, it does.
He's not really the main character. He's one of an ensemble, which has become reflective of kind of who he is as an actor at this point.
Yeah, I mean, he's not the main character in Glass. He's not the main character in Unbreakable. It is very fascinating.
He's not the main character in literally a single movie in the MCU, but he seems to be... he's the biggest star in Glass, which is why he's on the cover and why it's named Glass.
Yeah, 100%.
He's a bigger star than Bruce Willis at this point.
He's a bigger star than anyone in the movie. I mean, you've got, if we go in order, I believe on the actual sheet, it was Sam Jackson, Bruce Willis, Sarah Paulson. James McAvoy, excuse me, Sarah Paulson, Anya, and then Spencer. Yeah. I believe in that order. Sarah and Anya might have been switched, but Sam's number 1.
And it's called that. It's not even so. What's fascinating about this is we started having a conversation about this episode, and first you literally said to me, you were like, "Look, man, I don't know if like just us talking about Sam Jackson for a whole show is interesting." But I said, "Well, okay." So I said, "Let's really break this down. Is this worthwhile?
Let's talk about why we think he's interesting."
And that kind of came down to a few key factors. The first of which is box office. Now, some of you guys don't know this. I'm going to be dead honest. We didn't know this.
No, I mean, I think my guess was Will Smith.
I said to you, I think he is the highest grossing black actor of all time.
Yeah.
He's not just the highest grossing black actor of all time, guys, which he absolutely is.
By like millions of miles. Billions.
He's the highest grossing actor in the history of movies.
Period. If you include the cameos that Samuel L. Jackson has done in his films, he averages an average of 70 million. And that's even the really small movies. You got to think that's an average.
With cameos? The guy's made over $15 billion in box office receipts. If you don't include cameos, he's over $5.1 billion. 70 years old. this is insane. It's unheard of. He didn't even get famous till he was like 40.
Right.
Like, it's crazy. I couldn't believe it when I read that number. I was like, maybe this is out of date. And I started checking it, and it's like, that's the thing. He knows that too.
Oh, he absolutely does. I mean, he's very self-aware. And I think the other thing that you talk about is the amount of work that this gentleman's done. Sam Jackson has 182 projects, I believe, on his IMDb page.
And when I counted that, by the way, it's a lot of the times when you look at a guy that has that many credits, you'll start to look and it's like TV, short, video game,
appearance as himself.
He's got well over 150 of those 182 credits that are films. Film roles.
Roles.
Yeah, even if he has like one scene, it's still... They're not just like a video game voice or a short or something for TV. Like, he's got some TV credits in there, but really he is legitimately in since basically the mid 80s.
Yeah. And he started in the 70s, but it was like in the mid 80s is when he stopped being like this guy or guy selling cigarettes or guy playing cards.
It's like 88 when he actually, and we're, coming up today on the show, we are going to talk about sort of the factors, the guys that are the closest, the people who we think have the closest relationship to Samuel L. Jackson in terms of a similar career. We are also going to talk about each of our top 3 just like fuck yeah fist pump moments about Sam Jackson, the ones that we are the most excited about that we've ever seen in his career, which, if you guys are listening, we want you to comment in the comments with yours as well, but we'll get to that in a second. So, his box office receipts, I think that's the first point that really puts him in a class of his own. The second, just the sheer volume, which you just mentioned. It's like if you talk about guys that have been in that many projects, and they exist.
Oh, of course.
It's usually guys that at a certain point started doing VOD, straight-to-video TV projects. And you'll look at certain stretches of their career and you've never heard of, for like 14 projects in a row, you haven't heard of a single one.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, Jack Nicholson has 77 credits on his IMDb. 77.
Yeah.
There's 105 more on Sam Jackson's, and they've been working for...
close to the same. I mean, Jack's like late 60s, but...
Bruce Willis was obviously way more famous than Jackson ever was earlier on in his career.
They started working actually pretty close.
They did.
They really get famous around the same time.
And so for me, do you remember your introduction to Sam Jackson? Do you remember the first time you ever saw him on screen?
I would have to think more than likely it's Pulp Fiction, because growing up, we watched that in my family so much.
So we didn't in mine, but I watched with my buddy Die Hard with a Vengeance.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I ever saw Sam Jackson on screen. And that's kind of, I mean, like, he does have some of his shtick in there.
Yeah.
But he's also like a dad. But he's like an angry dad and like, an angry black dad, which like there's a lot of like injected comedy in there, you know?
Yeah.
But that was the first time I ever really saw Sam Jackson, and like, he wasn't that guy back then yet.
And if you take actors or even actresses who had a moment where they broke out and then they were really famous, generally speaking, they get famous enough that they stop doing as many projects. And so there's stretches.
Right.
You look at Dustin Hoffman, for instance, who's a character actor, and he got really famous, and he's huge in the 70s, right? You get to the 80s when he sort of should be having his like gravy train years. Dustin Hoffman did 4 movies in the 80s.
Right.
He won Best Actor for one, but he literally was in 4 movies in the 1980s. Like that, Sam Jackson never did anything like that. He was doing like 3 movies a year, 4, 5 movies a year forever. He's never stopped. The volume is outrageous. No one has ever kept up, and nobody's ever been. He's been so famous for so long.
Yeah, and the other, you talk about being so famous for so long. I think the final thing about his career that is so unique, that is so interesting, is in that longevity, his biggest moments, his greatest moments of fame became between the ages of 50 and the ages of 70.
That's so crazy.
It's insane. Like, how many people out there even get to keep working after they've been in the business for 20, 30 years as they start as a 40-year-old man,
By the time, by the time, Halle Berry or Jennifer Lopez, J-Lo's over 50 now, I think, right?
J-Lo's
like
close.
52.
Yeah,
by the time J-Lo turns 50, people are like, wow, J-Lo's still in movies. She looks so good for 50.
Yeah.
It's like when Tom Cruise turns 50, people are like, I can't believe he's still doing Mission Impossible stunts. It's
right.
like when Sam Jackson turned 50, they gave him a Star Wars movie, and within 5 years, he was Nick Fury.
Yeah.
He's like...
And he doesn't play the old man. That's the other thing.
No.
He does, and when he does play the old man, you got to make him look older, because he doesn't look old enough yet to play a 70-year-old, like what we think a 70-year-old looks like in film.
Yeah.
He honestly, in those Wonder Woman pictures, or not Wonder Woman, excuse me, Captain Marvel pictures, you're like,
I mean, but they also CGI the shit.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's
Yeah,
you wonder how much they actually had to use.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't look that much older.
Yeah, he takes pretty good care of himself. And I happen to know, we just did an episode, as you mentioned, with Spencer Street Clark.
Yeah.
And we were talking to him a little about his experience with Jackson. And he was talking about having dinner with him during the shoot for Glass. And He was saying that, I was like, I had read this because Sam Jackson, some of the earlier parts of his career, there seems to be some applause.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening out there. It's a party that we weren't invited to.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to wait until these guys are filming, and we're going to throw the party.
He got sober basically when he became famous. It's like his first significant role really is in Jungle Fever, and he plays a crack addict.
Yeah.
And he had just come out of rehab, and he's been sober, I believe, ever since. So, he got sober at that time, but it's just interesting when you look back at his whole career and you think about how long it's been. The reason I think that Sam Jackson is able to look as good as he does, keep working for 70 years old is probably because of that. He decided at a certain point he was going to take care of himself.
Well, I bet also he probably had a moment in his life where he was like, I need to change. Not only am I not going to make it to where I want to be, is I'm probably going to die if I keep doing this. And so you look, and that's from 80 to 93 is when he's like in this weird phase of like he's doing theater, he's doing like small TV movies, he's definitely into drugs. And then as you said, Jungle Fever comes around, directed by Spike Lee.
Yeah.
And that's kind of when it's not like right then you're like, oh my God, Sam Jackson's going to be somebody, but maybe in his mind that was when he was like, I can be something bigger.
Because he's given roles throughout this time in a bunch of Spike movies. There's a couple things happening in the 80s with him, which is that he was largely mentored by Morgan Freeman. That's like an early part of his career. He became good friends, and that was an early mentor for him. And then on top of that, Spike started giving him roles. So he's in School Days. He's in Mo Better Blues. He's in Jungle Fever. He's in Do the Right Thing, and that starts to put him on the radar with the general consciousness, people that are watching these movies. But talking about where he was raised, he really didn't know his dad. Yep. He met his dad 2 times. His dad died of alcoholism, so some of the addiction is obviously in his genes. And he was pretty hard partying. He denies it, but for a long time, it was assumed and rumored that he was a Black Panther. He was part of the Black Panther Party.
Yep.
He was an usher at Martin Luther King's wedding, or
his funeral.
His funeral.
We forgive you.
Yeah, and he has a pretty interesting career. He only really, he played a bunch of instruments growing up. He only really became interested in theater as he got a little older. This
is something that I find so fascinating, especially being an actor. And recently, I just went back and reread one of Stanislavski's books. He's my favorite acting coach, teacher, whatever you want to talk about. And he talks a lot about how if you want to be a great actor, you need to live a very full life. You can't just watch movies and watch theater and read scripts and read books. You need to actually go out there and live. And so, like, I love to hear all these things about Sam Jackson, what he did before he ever became an actor. Yeah. That's why he comes into film. And again, like, I don't think you and I we're not sitting here saying Sam Jackson's the greatest actor ever.
No, the most interesting career I've ever seen.
And so to have someone like that then come into movies in their 40s with that life experience, I think adds to why he's a really cool dude and why he's such a hardworking, humble dude. And so this is the next thing I wanted to talk about before we get into breaking down exactly the next step and the comparisons is you and I both thought Sam Jackson was probably kind of an asshole, which I think is fascinating.
His whole like motherfucker thing that he does.
And he just seems like he's too cool for school, and it seems like he'd be too famous to care and too busy to be bothered. And all these things.
The clips you see, like he gives that, for good reason, of course, the LA Times reporter, remember who confuses him? Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
I think he asks him a question about being, I think it's that he asks him a question about maybe being Dennis Haysbert. Possibly the State Farm commercials, or it's something else where he confuses him with something. And that's when he's like, I'm the other black actor. What's in your wallet? Like he's doing that whole thing.
Yeah.
And he's like pissed. He's like giving him a hard time. It's really funny. And I don't know. I'm kind of with you, but talking to, as we've done the research for both our Unbreakable episode and also this episode, the stories I'm hearing, the interviews I'm watching, he's just like pretty well loved. It's not at all what I thought.
Yeah, you talk about, Spencer was telling us a cool story, and I'll let you finish it, but he was just telling us before we get to the story, just that like, he's just the coolest, nicest, friendliest dude. He's the guy that will talk to you on carpets. He's the guy that'll go out of his way. It seems almost like Tom Cruise to us. It sounds like on set. He remembers everyone's name. He's so polite. Like, I love that. And so
really cool.
When they were out filming Glass, Spencer was telling us that he actually spent a lot more time with Sam Jackson this time around than he did with Bruce. Obviously, him and Bruce spent a ton of time together on Unbreakable.
Yeah.
But he was saying that one night him and Sam Jackson were out to dinner, and I stepped away because I used the restroom.
He was like, yeah, we went out to dinner, and we were, just talking, and he was like, you always want to ask these guys questions about, their career or whatever when you hang out with them, but like when you're working, you don't really want to bother people while they're working, and I said to him, I can totally relate to this. I go to these premieres, I talk to people at the after parties, but it's not like I want to be like, hey, stop what you're doing and let me interview you, right? Like you don't really get to do that. I've told my Stallone story before, but really I'm with the guy for an hour. I don't get to ask almost any questions because like it's not appropriate.
Yeah.
And so he was sort of saying the same thing, and he was like, yeah, I was out to dinner with Sam, and I got to just kind of be like, Tarantino. And he's like, oh, let me tell you all about Tarantino. He's just like so excited to talk about this shit. And then he's like, and like a fan walked up while we were having dinner, and he's just like, are you Samuel Jackson? And he's like, I'm eating my motherfucking chicken pot pie. and he's like, if it was anybody else, the fan would have been probably pissed.
Right.
But because it's Sam Jackson and he like says motherfucker, and he's like kind of jokey about it, the fan was like so excited.
That is so funny.
He's like pretty good natured. Like I just think it's so cool like when you hear that type of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's refreshing, right? Because again, we were talking about a dude that's been working since the 70s, and he's been. So this is another thing you and I have talked about a lot in our friendship and in our careers as movie critics, is we talk about A-list actors.
Yeah.
And like what it means to be an A-list actor. Now, Sam Jackson has been nominated once.
1994, he was nominated in 95 Oscars for Pulp Fiction.
Ever.
That's it.
And I don't think there's any role that you and I are like, oh my God, you remember when Sam Jackson was Mace Windu? You know what I mean? Like,
there's like a Time to Kill. He could have been close to getting a nom. There's a few others in there. A few others in there. Deep Blue Sea could have gotten nominated.
But my point, I was like, wait a second. My point behind that is that he is one of the most famous people in the world, despite basically not ever being a leading man. He's always like the counterpart.
Yeah.
Even when he was like, I mean, there's Shaft.
Yep.
Like there's movies that Formula 51. Like he definitely starred in.
The Negotiator.
But for the most part, he shot. I mean, like even Black Snake Moan. Like he's the secondary character in that, but he's definitely not the lead. He's awesome in that. He's just so good as a guy. It's so weird. There's so few guys out there that are basically never the leading man that ever get as famous as Sam Jackson is.
He is more famous at this point than he's considered talented. I know that's crazy, but I believe it's true.
And I think that's the same thing with The Rock as well.
Yeah.
But The Rock has been going like this forever.
Yeah.
Whereas Sam Jackson has kind of been like, it's almost been like this. And then this, and then this, and then now he's just like, he's through the roof.
He's kind of in the Stallone territory now, where like it's not even like Stallone, other than just the Rocky movies, is doing anything at all. Like other than just 2 Creed movies, Stallone hasn't done anything, save The Expendables, in like almost 20 years that would be considered significant. He's like really just not a thing, but it's just his general like, Rocky was so iconic, and he's like pretty well loved. So
yeah, Stallone's been in 100 less projects than Sam has. So I mean, I feel like this is a pretty good segue to talk about comparisons.
Yeah, like so we really racked our brain, and again, guys, like this is such an interesting conversation for us because it's pretty rare. Other than Denzel Washington, which is like a pretty commonly known theme, Denzel is the most famous black actor I would argue at this point that's ever lived. Like, I mean, it's him, Sidney Poitier, Morgan Freeman, or Sam Jackson.
Yeah.
That's the 4 guys you'd really. Will Smith, I guess.
Yeah, and Will. Yeah.
But basically, like when you think about Sam Jackson right now, because of the nature of movies. I mean, this is interesting. This is a quote here that I found. 1993, Sam Jackson says, "Casting black actors is still strange for Hollywood. Denzel gets the offer first, then it's Danny Glover, Forrest Whitaker, Wesley Snipes. Right now, I'm the next one on the list." That's like him reaching new fame in 1993. And, he makes that point 26 years ago. We're really not that different of a world now. It's not the same guys, but you're still looking at basically 5 people.
Well, yeah. And honestly,
it's like how I mean,
Denzel's still just the guy. He's just still the number 1 guy.
And the rest, Danny Glover has aged out pretty hard.
For sure.
Snipes is still...
Yeah, they're all kind of off, but now it's just become like a different group of them. But it is a fascinating... Well, what was your point?
My point was that when you initially start talking about, unfortunately, any black actor, just because of the nature of movies, the fact that you don't often have, more recently, but historically, you don't have a lot of movies that are led by a full cast of black actors.
It's literally only been the last couple of years.
Or even balanced. It's usually a bunch of white guys and 1 black guy. Mm-hmm. And if you think about Sam Jackson, the first thing you do is you start comparing him to other black actors. So that was the first thing. And you were like, look, man, I don't want to go on a show and just you and I just start rambling about the careers of black actors.
Right.
Why are we the qualified guys to talk about it?
We're not.
And I agreed. I was like, okay. I was like, but I'll do you one better. Name me an actor then who we can compare him to. Any actor, any actress, just give me one career.
And we were on the phone last night, and I was like, well, let's see, Jack Nicholson, he's around the same age, but he's, really over the last few years, De Niro, Pacino, well, they did this.
The ladies that have worked, like if you try to, Streep has like 22 Oscar nominations.
Right.
Totally different ballgame.
Totally different quality. Well, the other thing too about Sam is that like he's been in so many things as so many ridiculous roles that I don't think it's actually possible for him to be typecast, even though he's typecast. You know what I mean? Like
Totally.
He's typecast regularly as a specific type of role, but he can also show up in a Marvel movie. He could show up in a DC movie. He could show up in a Lego movie. Like he could show up in any movie ever, and I would be like, oh, there's Sam Jackson.
If Samuel L. Jackson was like the guy hosting the Oscars, if Samuel L. Jackson was the guy making like a speech before like the presidential inauguration, like
Anything.
it's not surprising. He's Sam Jackson. You just sort of are like, he's just like a national treasure.
I mean, he really is. He's become kind of like our Chuck Norris. So when you talk about people that are actually
On his level,
comparisons,
sort of.
you have to think they have to have been working for at least 40 years.
They've got to have a large body of work. So the first one we listed here as a possibility has that. They've been working a long time. And it's Anthony Hopkins. And I think the comparisons are Hopkins gets his break at 43 years old when he plays a role in The Elephant Man.
Right.
And that's in the 80s. I think it may be actually 1980. And he's like early 40s. Anthony Hopkins, a theater guy. It's well received. If I remember correctly, John Hurt is in that movie. I think it's David Lynch. And he, it's a good movie. Anthony Hopkins is remembered in that movie. He's memorable. He's in some other stuff. And then, of course, the big moment, the iconic moment is Hannibal Lecter in 91.
I thought you were going to say The Edge.
Yeah, it's a little later.
I'm going to kill the motherfucker. Yeah, so he wins for Hannibal Lecter for a role that he's only on screen for, 15 minutes, I think is what they say.
18 or something really short.
And then he does a lot in the 90s, like a lot. And then, so I was talking about his most recent parts of his career, and it feels like he's fallen off a bit, but then, he shows up in Thor. He's Odin.
He's Odin. He's got 3
times.
movies in there. So he's got that going for him, right? He's 2 seasons of Westworld now. He's significant in Westworld. It's a huge HBO show. He's in other movies that show up where you're like, but he's also older, right?
He's a decade older, and they killed off Odin.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Spoiler alert.
In the 90s, following up Silence, he goes on the classic I'm a respected actor run where he's in a bunch of Oscar contending movies. So he gets nominated each 2 years for 7 years. He wins for Silence. A couple years later, it's Remains of the Day. A couple years after that, it's Nixon. A couple years after that, it's Amistad. In the middle there, he does The Edge. He does Instinct. He starts being in The Fastest Indian. Like he's in these movies.
Yeah, I forgot about that movie.
Hearts in Atlantis. Like he's in a bunch of movies, right? And you're like Fracture. Yeah. Which I actually started watching that recently.
So he's been in 134 films. The Wolfman. Anybody? And I think he's actually very similar in that sense because he does play a lot of the same role. Like over and over, the same way that Sam Jackson does, but he can also depart from it.
At Sam Jackson's age right now, he was playing a role in Beowulf. That's where he was at like 70.
Yeah. Which is sweet. Because Beowulf was, I know, I'm going to destroy you. But there's this thing about Anthony Hopkins where he's not, because Anthony Hopkins does commercials too, right?
And he's well loved. He's got a social media presence. He posts, like people like his social media presence.
Is it just that he's just not as cool as Sam? Like, what is it?
It's the fact that what Sam Jackson's done that's different than Anthony Hopkins is that he did the I'm a good actor, like I can do my good actor thing,
right? But
I can also do my caricature of myself. I'm a stereotype. I'm Sam Jackson. I'm yelling I'm in Deep Blue Sea.
I'm in Snakes on a Plane.
I'm the Dave Chappelle character. He can do that, and he also understands that he can do that. So he's able to kind of do both things. He'll do the Capital One commercials. He's not really somebody who's afraid of doing anything. He'll do Snakes on a Plane, but he'll also reprise his role in Glass and turn in a really strong performance. He'll do The Incredibles. He's a lot more varied, and whereas Anthony Hopkins doesn't really have a gimmick, he's just the thing that would have been his gimmick, he didn't keep doing. He didn't keep playing serial killers. He didn't
keep playing the creepy, weird dude because he was so good at it. But you also couldn't. He couldn't regurgitate that performance without you just thinking it's Hannibal Lecter.
He just became what so many actors as they get into the elderly years of their career, the wise old character. He became that, and no fault to him. He's the of the guys we're going to talk about, he's arguably the best actor. I think he's a really phenomenal actor.
Oh, he's an incredible actor.
But that's, I think you can reference him because the length of his career, because the fact that he's continuing to be in high-profile work so late in his career, and he got such a late start.
Yeah, and then the other guy on the other side of it is Morgan Freeman, who is actually also 10 years older.
Same age as Hopkins, born the same year, mentor to Sam Jackson, gets his first Oscar nomination in '88 for Street Smart. One more Oscar nomination than Anthony Hopkins, and another guy. But the difference between him and Anthony Hopkins,
he's won. Well, Anthony, they've both won.
Yeah, they've both won Oscars. Yeah. But I was going to say is the difference is he has two functions also.
Yes.
Right. So he's got the same thing, the elderly older character, right, and the really charming, likable. So he plays God and Bruce Almighty, that kind of thing.
Yep. Or
the voiceover guy.
The incredible narrator voice. The March of the Penguins, the Shawshank Redemption.
He's the most famous for that role. And I think he is most famous for Shawshank.
Right.
He's the most famous voiceover of all time. Right?
Yeah, I mean, and also you talk about career-defining roles. Yeah. Something that you and I have talked about a lot. Hannibal Lecter is.
What's your best Morgan Freeman impression?
When I was a boy. No.
I love the Frank Caliendo reading the LeBron James. I'm leaving the Cleveland, or no, I'm leaving the Heat to go to Cleveland.
Yeah.
He's like, Miami to me was like college for other kids. I did not know that then. I know that now.
I know that now.
It's the best thing ever.
And then for Morgan, it's Red. It's got to just be Red, right?
Yeah, it has to. For his character, Red in Shawshank, yeah.
What else would it be for Morgan Freeman? I mean, he's been obviously in so many movies, but it's not like, what's his name in Seven?
Exactly. He's well known in Seven. It's not Bruce Almighty, though. People do remember that role.
Yeah,
he's well loved.
People remember him from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves as well.
Yeah, and there's some earlier stuff. Glory and Driving Miss Daisy are both huge movies, and I think as he went, his last Oscar nom came for, $1 Million Baby's what he wins for, but then his last Oscar nom came for playing Nelson Mandela in Invictus, which I never saw.
Never saw it either.
But yeah, he's been in a lot of stuff, and he continues to work, but he definitely doesn't have another thing that immediately jumps out at me. Lucius Fox is the biggest thing he's done in the last 15 years.
Well, what's fascinating with Sam Jackson is I think if you talk about anyone you go, what's his career-defining role? If they knew what it was, they would go, oh, it's Jules. It just is.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
But then you think a little harder, and you're like, well, he's also done Mace Windu. And also, if I'm 20 years old now instead of 30 years old, it's just Nick Fury. It just is.
For Sam Jackson at this point, there's not even a comparison. It's just Nick Fury.
So really, you truly believe that kind of eclipses Jules?
Because while Pulp Fiction is really famous, and if you like movies, you'll have seen Pulp Fiction, and it's we talked about this on our episode of AMA talking about it. It's lasted really well. People really like that movie.
Oh, it's held up very well.
It's not 20 movies, and it's not the 20th highest grossing movies, and it's not. He's so distinctive. He's not the only thing about Pulp Fiction that gets remembered. And then with Mace Windu, there are better Star Wars movies now, before and after those that are remembered more, that are remembered and discussed more. And then, they're all huge, but there's just no question. If you talk to anybody right now and you say Samuel L. Jackson, they're going to say, they might say what's in your wallet because they've seen the commercials a lot. They'll probably say Nick Fury.
Yeah. And this is, so we haven't completely ruled out why these guys don't really match up the same way that Sam Jackson does. But I think we'll be able to do that if we go in and we talk about our fist pump moments, because my fist bump moments specifically in Sam Jackson's career are so polarizing. Every single one of them, they're all so vastly different. And I know you can look at either of those other two guys' careers and talk about roles where they played someone vastly different. But in all of these roles that I'm talking about, in these movies that I'm going to be talking about, they're big movies too. And everyone saw.
I would argue that at 70, 70, Anthony Hopkins was not as famous as Sam Jackson is now because he hadn't played Odin yet.
No, not at all.
And I would argue that at 70, Morgan Freeman was close. But that was still before Dark Knight. 75 in the middle of the Dark Knight trilogy, maybe he's right there.
It's just still a different type of fame.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
It's just everyone knows who these guys are. Whereas I feel like people want to party with Sam Jackson.
Totally.
People would be want to go out to tea with Morgan Freeman and Anthony Hopkins. They wouldn't want to hurt them.
Everybody wants them to be their uncle.
Yeah. You're give me. I don't want to hang out with you. I just want you to give me advice.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's what I want. So I'm going to jump in with my very first Sam
it.
Jackson fist pump moment because I'm going to, and it is without a doubt for me the first time I saw him in Django Unchained.
Yeah, such a good one.
It's one of my favorite performances by him. It's such a departure from what you normally see. He's he's pathetic and groveling, and he's such a kiss ass, and he's weak, and he hates black people.
He's
and
laughing at DiCaprio.
Yeah, just the whole he's got this gross laugh. I think it might be my favorite performance by him ever.
Really?
But I think what I love so much about it is it's just so polarizing from what you normally see Sam Jackson do. And it was also in the middle of Sam Jackson just kind of being this crazy caricature of himself. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
What are the movies on the other side of Django? Or what are the things he was doing leading up to it?
Right around Django, I mean, just right afterwards, he does Winter Soldier comes out the next year, RoboCop comes out the next year. Avengers is the same year. Right before it, he's got
so literally in all those movies, he's being badass Sam Jackson.
Yeah, I mean all the Marvel movies. He has a little bit of a shorter run. The other guys is right there.
Right. In that he's being loudmouth cop, knows everything. Cash bar. Yeah. But then he does Django in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Working with Quentin again, who I'm sure, Samuel lends a ton of his success to Quentin Tarantino. How could he not?
He would have to.
But that role for me, I was reminded why I love Sam Jackson so much. It was because he's done this shtick thing for so long.
Yeah.
But then in the middle of it, he can just step away and do a movie like that in a role like that, and you're just like, holy shit, dude, you're actually a very good actor.
Yeah, right, totally.
You just don't always have to try that hard to act because you can just do this thing that you're so good at for 20, 30 years. But then when you actually see him act, you see him act in Glass and you see him act in Django, I loved it. It was one of my happiest moments in memory of his career. What do you got?
My first one we just talked about, and I think you guys would see it coming, and it's playing dancing and the other guys. The Rock Sam Jackson section of that movie at the beginning when they show up as dancing in Highsmith is arguably the funniest part of the whole movie, and he's just so good. He has such a good grasp on being that character, and it's he's yelling and he's got the turtleneck and he's just his lines. He has so many good lines, like the scene in the bullpen. But I love when they are about to go catch their first thing. He's like, dancing in Highsmith, rolling heavy, cream puff.
You're like, what? And then what do they say when they crash into the bus with his car?
Can someone call 911? Holy shit! Yeah.
It's just this is so stupid. If I want you to talk, I'll shove my hand up your ass.
Work him out like a puppet.
Yeah.
Bai Ling's gonna be there. Yeah.
Super Chef Bobby Flay, Chris Daughtry.
He starts yelling at him, he's just incredible in this movie. Aim for the bushes, people always talk about. It's just far and away, when I think about it, it gives me so much joy.
And it's him making fun of himself.
Yeah, he has a great, he just has a great grasp on it. I'm sure he had so much fun filming it. That's my first one.
Yeah. And that's the other thing that Spencer was telling us about. He's just always having a great time on set. He'll joke around with M. Night and kind of give him crap, but he's always prepared. He's always incredibly professional. He's always on time. He's always memorized. That's the other thing that we'll probably get to in a minute, is talking about how the way you carry yourself on set really carries your career. So before we get to that, my next fist pump for sure, it's just him in Glass. Again, apparently I don't like Sam Jackson doing what he's best at, but what he's best at is being an actor.
Yeah.
And I love him in Glass. I love and in Unbreakable. I just love the character of Glass. I love how many, he says I'm not a mistake numerous times. There's so much hurt in him. He's not intimidating.
No.
He's not physically imposing. His voice, he never yells.
He's a really believable character.
And when he falls down the stairs,
it's crushing.
It's so hard to watch, and at the end, it's this weird, desperate cry that I finally know my purpose. I'm not a mistake.
I'm not a mistake.
All this shit. It's just so great. And then honestly, in in Glass, you see him sustain an injury at some point.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh.
It's
just the way he portrays it. He does such an excellent job.
Yeah.
I just don't want to spoil anything. But for those of you that have seen it, you know what I'm talking about. I love watching him play this weak character in Mr. Glass.
He's terrific. I think my second one I'm going to go with is going to just have to be playing Zeus in Die Hard with a Vengeance. It's another Zeus. Bruce Willis, Sam Jackson role, and this is a little more of his character that he gets cast to play a lot. The really kind of angry, but you know, like it just has so many good moments in that movie. Like Zeus got, you know, lightning bolts up your ass. Like
King of Mount Olympus.
Yeah,
you ever heard of him?
Yeah. He's just fucking great, and like their chemistry in that movie is really, really great. They're fun together. They're funny. I just have always loved that character, and it's the distinctive one of the Die Hard movies because it's just basically Hans Gruber and that character are the two Die Hard characters that stand out of the McClane.
And I also really love how it's almost like Jules is discovering how smart he is throughout the movie.
Zeus.
Like, Zeus, excuse me. How he's like kind of discovering how intelligent he is throughout the movie. Like how well him and Bruce Willis work together and how he helps solve a lot of the problems. It's like...
The fact that you just said Jules instead of Zeus.
Yeah. Is literally my next... Well, because it's also because I was thinking about my next thing.
And me losing to Mark-Ann fucking Draco in the Schmodown.
Oh, yeah.
I did that.
You
literally.
called him Jules.
I said Jules.
That's because you're worse than me. My final one is Jules.
And me too. So we can
it not
both on this one. And I mean, I think when you and I did Pulp Fiction on AMA, one of the things we talked about is there's...
It's like a month ago, right?
Yeah, pretty recently. Yeah. When he started that whole sequence, right? The entire sequence where he's the first time that let's get into character, and he's talking about Big Kahuna Burger, and I'm sorry, did I break your concentration? And he's giving the speech, Ezekiel 25:17. There's this one shot where he's back to you, and he starts turning, and you see those crazy eyes as he turns. I think it's as he says, I will strike down with great vengeance and furious anger, just as he turns. And there's something about that shot, the look in his eyes, the way that his jaw turns, that became so iconic and memorable from that movie. Yeah. And that's just when I think of Sam Jackson. It's hard to not think of that moment still.
The amount of presence that that dude commands is I think, maybe what we're missing. Like, maybe that's the thing that we're not talking about. He has this it factor. How many times can that scene be playing in the background in the room? How many times can these scenes that we talk about that are like so impactful for us be happening and you not stop what you're doing and pay attention to him?
Oh, that's one of the all-time scenes.
I think that maybe is what it is like, even if Sam Jackson isn't the best actor, there's something mesmerizing and engaging about him to where you can't ignore him.
And I actually said the other day, I think I referred to him as like a pretty good actor, and you were like, dude, he's a really fucking good actor. Like I think because like you discredit him a little because he doesn't take himself that seriously and he works so much. You sometimes will lose sight of how much commitment to character he's giving you because you feel like you're seeing the same thing so often.
Right.
You know, as opposed to Hoffman doing 4 movies in the 80s. Of course it's going to feel like or Daniel Day-Lewis. When you barely work, you see somebody disappear into a character, it's easier to forget who they are.
But then you see this guy who constantly delivers at this level.
Yeah.
Whether it's Deep Blue Sea, Snakes on a Plane, or playing in Pulp Fiction, one of the most iconic movies of all time, there's never a moment... How many times have you watched a movie with someone that you love and you're like, he's just kind of phoning this one in, isn't he?
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
I mean, like, even talking about Glass, we kind of joked with one another, like, this is the easiest paycheck he's ever gotten.
Yeah.
But he still brought it in every scene.
Yeah, even the ones that he's not talking.
The
he's
twitching,
doing his job.
the everything. It's like I don't know. I just find it fascinating.
Yeah, I've never met the guy, but he's definitely one of those guys that you hear great things about. So those are going to be our fist pump moments. I think like the thing we'll do kind of before we wrap up here because we've. I think we're probably about a half an hour or so in, maybe a little less. I want to talk about just sort of the eras of his career so we can really get an understanding of where he was versus then to now.
Because you and I talk a lot about how most actors, and on our show we've talked about the most is Tom Cruise in the phases of his career because there's like the pre and post couch and things like that. But with Sam Jackson, you talk about someone who's been in the business for 40 plus years.
Not everybody has... I mean, I think that's one thing you can be clear about is that there are guys that have worked a long time that don't really have differences in their careers.
No.
Maybe 2 phases, but rarely do you get a guy who's been around long enough and significant for long enough that you can have 4 phases, and he's one of the guys.
Right.
So, you start, we mentioned kind of the 80s into the early 90s, and it's a combination of small parts, but he's still partying hard. He's drinking, he's doing drugs, he overdosed on heroin several times, went to rehab. He survives it. He gets into his 40s, and Spike Lee's given him a few roles, and it's Jungle Fever kind of breaks through. 93, he has a small part in True Romance.
You said he plays a crack addict in Jungle Fever. Have you seen it?
When I was a kid.
You don't remember?
Yeah, I mean, like I think I've seen that and Do the Right Thing once, and maybe Do the Right Thing just like on TV. But I mean, like basically, he's not really famous yet. He's like a notable. 1990, he has a small role in Goodfellas. I don't know if you remember. He's like a truck driver, but he doesn't really have hardly any lines.
Yeah.
And then 93, he's in True Romance in a small part at the beginning. And, you're talking to Drexel. And then Tarantino wrote the role of Jules for Sam Jackson.
Isn't that crazy? And there must have been something that he saw on the set of True Romance that he was like, this guy can be something else.
And so he did. And so what Jackson said, like when that happened, he's like, it was all, I think he describes it. He's like, it's a whole mess of different feelings when that happens. When somebody like Tarantino writes a role for you, it's humbling, it's exciting, it's arrogance, it's everything. The idea that somebody would see you and write this thing just for you to be this person.
Yeah.
And then he's like, I could have played Jules for years. He's like, I could have just taken roles, just reprising that energy over and over and over again, but I wanted to do different things. And so, Pulp Fiction, he gets his only Oscar nomination for playing Jules. And that's kind of when his career changes. That quote in '93 when he's talking about being the next guy, it's before Pulp Fiction comes out. So he's really like just up and coming at that point. He's been in a few things. People like him. He's got energy. It's '94 that it all just changes. All of a sudden, it's like his next 5 years before Star Wars are all just Hollywood trying to find a way to make a movie about Sam Jackson. So everything, and he's in a ton of movies, right? He's in Juice, he's in The Negotiator, he's in Formula 450.
You are not in control.
Yeah.
That's from The Negotiator, guys.
Time to Kill is a big one that he got a lot of,
I watched that movie a lot as a kid. It's really intense.
Eve's
really
Bayou, Losing Isaiah. Like he's in so many movies in the 90s.
Yeah, and then you go into the 2000s, which is like the next step. And what I was going to pull up here is something that I actually didn't get to share on our episode of Unbreakable. But so Shyamalan had already started writing Unbreakable through The Sixth Sense.
Yeah.
And he'd already approached Willis as he's like, I want you to be David Dunn in my next movie.
Yeah.
He'd already decided that he wanted Sam Jackson to be Mr. Glass.
Interesting.
And Jackson had no idea. And so Jackson recalled a meeting with Willis in a casino in Casablanca while they're on vacation. First of all, I'm just like, fucking kill me. Like, what do you guys? You guys are just hanging out in Casablanca?
It's different than our vacation to Casablanca.
Just a little bit. And Willis is like, hey, I just finished The Sixth Sense, and Knight's working on a new film, and he wants you to be in it. And like from that moment on, Sam Jackson was sold, even though he didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
But like, I just think it's fascinating. You talk about Quentin Tarantino saw Sam Jackson in True Romance and then wrote him this role.
Yeah.
M. Night Shyamalan saw Sam Jackson in whatever role it was while making The Sixth Sense, and he was like, I want him to be the guy whose bones are made of glass.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell? What is it about him that these writers look at and they're like, I think it's exactly what Spencer was telling us about, and this is why I kind of want to reiterate on that point, is that he's so professional.
Yeah.
He's always prepared. He works his ass off no matter how famous he is, and maybe that's it. Maybe these guys have just heard great things about Jackson because this is before he's really that famous, right? Like
totally
in the mid '90s is when he starts to really ride that. Casting him in Unbreakable is still kind of, I think, a bit of a risk.
He's like it's a stretch of a role. He's famous enough that you could do it, but it's also like you haven't seen him in a few years, other than really A Time to Kill, turn in a performance where you're like, wow, that blew my mind.
Right.
So you're still kind of banking on like this guy is just good enough on every level that I can get something out of him.
And in A Time to Kill, he's still an angry father whose daughter has been murdered and raped, and he's like seeking vengeance. Like, it's still not a broken man.
Yeah, yes, he deserves it. Yes, they deserve to die. And I hope they burn in hell.
Burn in hell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of through 99. Did you ever see Sphere? It's on there. Dustin Hoffman.
Did see Sphere, but I don't really remember it.
Anne Hesh maybe is the girl.
It's kind of creepy, right?
It's kind of creepy. People don't like that movie. I watched it as a VHS tape a bunch as a kid.
Why don't people like it? Just bad?
I think probably it's worse than I remember. It's one of those movies that like kind of like you probably, and like a lot of those shitty movies that you talked to me about that you loved growing up.
No idea what you're talking about. The Negotiator.
The Hunted.
It's not a bad movie. It's got 2 Academy Award winners in it.
There's like a lot of those movies that you talk about that it's the same thing. It's
like the hindsight is you remember them
as a
I
kid.
Remember this cover
U.S.
so
Marshals
well.
was sweet.
The Sphere cover. I know you guys can't really see it. Yeah.
And I watched it a bunch, and I really liked it, and I remember it was creepy as hell. So Sphere, and like he does all those movies. Obviously Die Hard 3 is in there.
But what's interesting about the 90s is he's still a domestic star, right?
Yeah, and one thing Spencer said to me was that, he was talking to Sam about his career, and Sam was like, they told me that I don't have international appeal. Well, I'm going to get international appeal.
Oh, really?
And he started to change his career. And so like Nick Fury. So there's one really interesting bit about his career we'll get to in just a second here because it's in this next phase. In 99, he's Mace Windu. And when he started shooting Star Wars, he agreed to do the role before he ever saw a script or even understood the character.
Yep, because he just loves Star Wars.
He just wanted to be a part of Star Wars.
Yeah.
And he agreed to do it, and he suggested the purple lightsaber. He thought that was cool. He wanted his character to stand out in a crowded battle scene. So, he's playing Mace Windu. Which
is also like only Sam Jackson gets to request that his lightsaber is different, so he stands out in a battle scene.
Yeah.
Like,
totally.
again,
the
it's
purple
crazy.
lightsaber's the only one.
Yep.
Or maybe there's more later.
No. Oh, yeah.
But, so he's Mace Windu, and he's... Sorry, Sam. Not particularly good.
Yeah, it's not a very good role, and him and the Emperor.
What's his line? He's like, I sense a great plot to destroy the Jedi by the Sith.
Yeah. I'm like, do you even know you're talking right now?
He's like,
tell you they were rolling?
There's like a guy with a teleprompter who's like following him off camera.
Yeah.
Say this. Just say this.
And they're like, oh, we'll use it.
He's like, what's in your wallet? Oh, it's the wrong. So he does that, but then the really interesting one is, so I've mentioned this before, but I'm a giant comic book fan, or at least growing up I was. I worked in comic book stores, and so at the time there was this writer named Mark Millar, who was an up-and-coming writer. He was an English guy, I think, English or Irish or something, but up-and-coming writer, and he had written all these series that were interesting and cool and like kind of sexy, pushing the envelope. And what's ended up happening is over the years, a lot of Millar's projects have made it to screen to the point that now he's as famous for, he wrote Wanted, the comic book, he wrote Kingsman. He's a very famous writer now. He wrote this thing called The Ultimates, and it was a retake on the Avengers. The idea was that they were going to sort of these classic characters, but they were going to modernize the whole approach, and they were going to make them look just like there was a hyper-realistic artist, and it was supposed to be like modern day. What would the Avengers look like if they started today? And Marvel went to Sam Jackson and requested permission to use his likeness for the character of Nick Fury, who classically had been white. White guy, brown hair, graying sideburns,
right.
Smoked a cigar all the time, blue spandex. Like that's the classic Nick Fury.
Yeah, seems correct for comics.
Yeah. It was because he was an old character, and they were like, we want to reimagine this. We basically just wanted to be Sam Jackson. And he gave his permission for them to use his likeness in 2002.
Which, once again,
so smart.
People just seeing something with Sam Jackson be like, he should be a part of this.
And at the time, it wasn't breaking yet. It wasn't like I knew that because I was reading it. I was like, he looks just like Sam Jackson.
Right.
Not realizing what had happened. Now, a few years later, when Marvel comes to him and says, we're gonna make these movies. We want to use you in the movies because you gave us the permission to use your likeness and those comics were so successful. Now he shows up at the end of Iron Man in a cutscene and he signs a 9-picture deal with Marvel, which he's obviously gone way past, and he continues. I don't know if he re-upped the deal or he just does movie by movie now, but he's the most consistent part of the entire MCU. He's like
he's oddly non-replaceable for someone who's not a superhero.
Yeah, it'd be weird.
What I mean?
It'd be weird at this point
wrong
to kill Nick Fury.
I'm okay with you getting rid of Downey and Evans in the next movie because I understand Hollywood and how it works. There's no reason Sam Jackson shouldn't just be Nick Fury forever.
Yeah, right. Give me 10 more years of Sam Jackson as Nick Fury. Like, I'm good with it.
Give me old man Nick Fury when he's like 85.
Yeah.
I'll watch it.
Totally, man. And like it looks like he's a significant part of Far From Home.
But yeah, so we were talking about the 2000s here and like the international acclaim, right? Because he does Star Wars, and then he does Unbreakable, and he does Shaft, and he does SWAT, and he does The Incredibles, and like all these movies.
Freedom Land, Coach Carter.
Yeah, Coach Carter. But that's when all of a sudden he becomes, because like it's not because of Sam Jackson. It's Unbreakable. You're like, oh, Bruce Willis.
Yeah.
You're like, well, Shaft wasn't that great. It wasn't that successful.
You're like The Incredibles, Pixar.
Yeah, Incredibles, Pixar. SWAT. Oh, Colin Farrell and Jamie Foxx at the top of their careers. Or no, Colin Farrell, not Jamie Foxx. Thinking of Miami Vice.
Yeah.
And then Snakes on a Plane. That's when he's become the Chuck Norris of the modern era. Isn't that like 2009 or something like that?
It's right in there, like 08 or something like that. And he's kind of learned to poke fun at himself. And he shows up in a role in Django, but it's like that's Tarantino. But like you look at his last few years, and it's like Tarzan, Kong, Hateful Eight, Incredibles 2, Glass, 3, 4, 5 more Marvel movies. Guy's 70 and he's having as good a career at the moment as anybody alive. Like one of the most famous people on the planet.
Like you could not dream to have a career this successful. It is unbelievable. Like you could ask to win an Oscar before asking to have a career like Sam Jackson's.
I think he's gonna get a Lifetime Achievement Award at some point.
100% he will.
I can't imagine at a certain point Hollywood not just being like the Academy just being like, we have to just give this. He's been in 200 movies. He's like one of the most recognizable faces and voices ever to live.
I mean, I'd still love to see him win an Oscar in a Tarantino movie because Tarantino's going to keep writing him these great roles.
Yeah.
Hateful Eight was still good. Like I said, I loved his role in Django. I would love to see Sam Jackson win an Oscar before he retires.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So
why not get up there with his boys Anthony and Morgan?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Jamie Foxx, like a lot of the biggest black actors now have won Oscars. Forrest Whitaker has won an Oscar now.
Yeah, Smith hasn't.
No, Smith. A couple nominations for Smith, and Smith probably has a win in him still.
Probably.
He has to keep doing good work, but he's still famous enough.
Tell the truth.
Tell the truth. That was an attempt.
Yes, it was.
Dr. Bennett Olamalu.
Don't say that.
All right, I tried to say his name. That's going to wrap us up, guys, on the most interesting career for the most interesting actor in Hollywood, Sam Jackson. Thank you guys so much for listening and watching. Be sure to check out our episode on Unbreakable and Action Movie Anatomy.
Yeah, make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts and on Podcast One to this show, and of course the Collider Podcast Network on YouTube.
Yeah, comment, like, I mean, if you guys agree with us, what are your 3 or 4 or 5 fist bump moments for Sam Jackson, or even just your favorite roles? I mean, I'd really love to know in the comments, do you guys agree with us? Is he everything we have cracked him up to be, or do you think there's somebody we forgot?
Yeah, exactly. That's my biggest thing, is I want to know about the other people out in Hollywood whose careers have been this vastly diverse and juxtaposing and just like long and just heavy. Huge workloads. So I love Sam Jackson. This is like I'm really glad we did this, because I don't know as much about Sam Jackson as I'd like to.
Yeah.
But like, I know enough to know that I absolutely love and admire this dude, and I'm so happy for him, as weird as that is to say.
Totally.
He doesn't need me to be happy for him. He's been successful for so long.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree. So guys, if you want to follow along, you can find me at Ben Bateman Media, Twitter and Instagram. We'll be back next week with I don't have our schedule in front of us, but something fucking sweet probably.
Yeah.
Oh no, I think I know what it is.
Well, yeah, so you guys can find me at Andrew Ghai, and yeah, go ahead.
I think it's an episode we're doing on like wilderness survival movies.
Yes.
Because there's a movie coming out called Arctic with Mads Mikkelsen. We Love the Gray with Liam Neeson.
Yep.
And The Edge with Anthony Hopkins is one of our favorite movies of all time. So there's a bunch of super sweet movies in that genre. We're going to kind of come up with a really interesting take on that. So come back next week. You guys will have some good laughs. And we're also covering one of either The Gray or Arctic on Action Movie Anatomy next week. One more time, guys, be sure to check out the live stream for the Schmodown New York. It's this Saturday. It's coming out of New York, out of Brooklyn. There's going to be an amazing show. It's Dan Murrell versus Ethan Irwin. And
what's the actual website now? Is it triviasd.com?
Yeah, triviasd.com.
Triviasd.com will have all those details you guys can check out, like the live stream, like the live event, and yeah.
Yeah, good shit. Thanks, guys.
See you next week.